Hello and welcome to Brussels, My Love, your News' weekly talk show that zooms into the highs and lows of EU politics. I'm Maeve McMahon, broadcasting this week from Strasbourg in France, where MEPs were meeting for their monthly voting session. Thanks so much for tuning in. Coming up this weekend, it's already 1 year since the murder of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. MEPs here reflected on his untimely death in an Arctic prison and also shone a light on the plight of numerous people living under political persecution. We check how thousands of Russian political migrants are doing now and discuss the Kremlin's hybrid war against the European Union, including Putin's bots trying to sway the upcoming German elections. And the race is on for artificial intelligence, with the EU lagging behind China and the US, and a brand new Chinese company, DeepSeek, arriving with a bang. We take a look at whether this week's Paris AI Summit was a hit or not. Among the attendees were the US's new Vice President, J.D. Vance, who gave a bombastic speech to the world. We break it down with our guests this weekend, and a warm welcome to them. We're joined by Markéta Gregorova, Czech MEP with the Pirate Party, Riho Terras, Estonian MEP from the European People's Party.
Hello.
And Stine Buss, Danish MEP with the Renew Europe Group. Thank you so much for joining us. But as always, before we bring in our MEPs, we just want to remind you what was being discussed this week in Strasbourg.
Russia's strategic response is simple. Deny, deny, deny. But the Kremlin's fingerprints are everywhere. Moscow's hybrid shadow war escalates across Europe. Its aim? To sow fear, doubt, and division. The recent damaging of key power and telecommunications cables in the Baltic Sea was just the latest incident of covert Russian operations targeting Europe's physical infrastructure and political stability. Moscow is suspected of involvement in at least 56 acts of sabotage, vandalism, influence operations, targeted violence, and assassination attempts since the Russian attack on Ukraine almost 3 years ago. The trend is rising, and operations are shifting westward, with countries like France and Germany becoming new targets. Are European governments ready to take up the fight?
So there you go. Are EU governments ready to take up this fight, or rather can they counter these threats? That's the question here. Markéta, we start perhaps with your take?
Yes, well, there's plenty of threats that we are facing. And I'm sort of afraid that we are not really paying attention to a lot of it. And even where we claim that there's a lot of what's happening, we don't do enough. And I will give three main examples. And that will be Ukraine, what we do with it. Then it will be Georgia, and that will be overall disinformation. I will be quick. So with Ukraine, of course, we did a lot. We applied sanctions, we stood up for Ukraine diplomatically, and for 3 years now we are standing behind them. And that's extremely important, and it's not something that I would take for granted. So I am grateful for that. However, you know, if you take a look at the real numbers, in terms of sanctions, like 160,000 rounds of ammunition has been sent from US, EU, Turkey and Japan companies just this February to Russia. You know, we sanction many companies, or US, for instance, sanctioned Italian Beretta because they are like part of Ruski Orel, and they still send them so much weapons. Why didn't we not sanction them? Why they can circumvent it? So my point is,
and of course,
we claim we do a lot.
Markéta, the 24th of February will mark 3 years since that full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But what we really want to talk about today as well is this hybrid war and the threats that we're facing here. Riho,
and that's where I wanted to go to Georgia.
We'll come back to you in a sec. Riho, just your take on whether EU governments have realised how big a challenge this is. Have they got the message?
Well, there are certain mistakes made always. It's not 3 years. In Ukraine, the war is already more than 10 years. And Putin's Russia has harassed his neighbors since Putin arrived in power. And first they dealt with the Chechen, then they attacked Georgia, then Ukraine. And that is the it's not about Putin, it's about mythos of Russian Держава, which is the power-based autocracy, very cruel autocracy, and that has not changed. And the aim of Putin is to change the world the way he wants it to be, back to the 1990s. And this aim is not yet achieved, this objective is not yet achieved, and he uses all possible ways to achieve that. And that is the multidimensional warfare, which has first diplomacy, then economy, which is all with the oil and gas issues, and hybrid attacks against infrastructure, and on the very end, he can use military weapons. So we need to deal with it together, united in Europe.
Are we able to, though? Is Putin winning this hybrid war?
No. I mean, we have to stand up to defend our values. And I'm very proud to say that my small country, per capita, is the place that has supported Ukraine the most. And my Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, is very clear on this, is very outspoken. There is no way that we can let Putin win. And this goes also for hybrid attacks and the cyber war and what is going on in the Baltic Sea at the moment, which is not only the cables, but it's also the shadow fleet and all these things where you can actually, if you boil it all down, we have to tell ourselves we are in a conflict, in a deep conflict.
We are in the war.
Yeah, we could perhaps even take it that far. I wouldn't use that word. But we have to understand that means a lot for each and every country, but it also means a lot for us as a community to stand together, to work together, and to beat up our budgets for defence.
And that's exactly what NATO defence ministers were meeting in Brussels this week. That is exactly what they were discussing. Yeah. And also this weekend, of course, it's the Munich Security Conference taking place with a lot of the world's attention on that to see can any outcome come out. We are, of course, live blogging and covering it all weekend here on Euronews. But one man who's also very worried about this hybrid threat for the last few years is Gabrielius Landsbergis. He's the former foreign minister of Lithuania, probably one of the Baltic's most well-known politicians, and we actually had a chance to speak to him earlier this week in Brussels.
So we have to be mindful that Russia is engaged in what is called sub-Article 5 activities in European and NATO countries. It's cutting cables, it's cutting pipelines, it's bringing in incendiary devices into airplanes and shopping malls, trying to get them burned down in order to increase pressure, in order to change the way that countries function, most obviously to reduce their support to Ukraine. And there's no other way to call it. They are fighting war. If we don't want to call it war, so let's at least call it shadow war.
Gabrielius Landsbergis there speaking to me in Brussels, calling this a shadow war, but it's not really making headlines. I feel like we're constantly talking about the boots on the ground war, the invasion, since the full scale, but really neglecting the seriousness of this misinformation war, this disinformation threat. And you mentioned Georgia. That's another country that the European Union needs to do a lot more to keep an eye on.
Yes, absolutely. I also wanted to get to the disinformation part, because if you ask if we are doing enough, I am afraid I have to say we do literally nothing. And with due respect to some national member states, such as Estonia, where there are programs, overall the European Union, apart from the Digital Services Act, which is now being attacked from all various sides, including our US partner, which already is telling something, we are unprepared. So whenever somebody asks me, are we in an information war? I say, well, technically, yes, but we are not fighting it. We are not technically part of it. There is no legislation, there are no proper definitions, there are no sanctions on those who are making business out of having disinformation. You know, it's not about your uncle spreading, some lies on the internet. He can, because it's, you have a right to be stupid, but it's about those who create business out of it and who want intentionally manipulate our trust in democratic institutions. And there are people and entities like that, and we need to target those.
And we're seeing, obviously, the German federal elections are coming up as well on the 23rd of the month, and we've seen there's been a surge of disinformation on X, Riho, according to government reports. A Kremlin-backed campaign is using fake sites and AI-generated content to spread false narratives. We have the Digital Service Act, but as we heard them from Marcotte, it is not really functioning.
Yeah, well, I think it is something which the politicians have to deal with. You have to get your people understand the messages that it is dangerous. What you hear in the X or whatever platform, it's not true. Today, they say that about 70% of internet content is created by AI. Or it's false or not false, false or not false, we don't know it. But the politicians need to make the people in the countries understand that that is a dangerous thing.
And are you doing that? Is that something you're doing?
Well,
is that part of your to-do list on a day-to-day basis, Steen?
It is a part of the to-do list, but I would also say that there is this argument going on in many countries, and definitely in mine, whether, you know, if you take the Digital Service Act, if you take other measures that could be taken, and in my opinion should be taken, is that actually also an attack on freedom of speech, which of course, in my opinion, is nonsense, because what is being attacked here is really our freedom, because it is, you know, changing our mindset without us knowing. Brexit was the first test case, and since then, of course, they have not given up, because that was giving them appetite to destabilise Europe, and that is the idea.
Rio?
We have in Estonia organizations called Propastop, which is a military National Guard organization, journalists in the free time going through all the news and then pointing out what is wrong and what is right. And you can go to the page. If you don't believe something, you go there and you will find out that it's wrong or right. And Propastop for last year was nominated here for a European prize even. But it was a good initiative.
And Estonia obviously is a small country of just over 1 million, so it's easy to manage it in a small country like that. But when you're talking about such a wide scale, and we're talking about Germany here, a massive country,
you can do it in every village. It's small villages there also.
We have a commissioner, right? We have the new commissioner. She's in charge of tech and democracy and security. Is she fit for the job? Will she be able to have any impact?
Actually, Henna Virkkunen will not be in charge of this, of Democracy Shield, as we call it, but Mr. McGrath will be, after all.
Well, they'll work together.
As I've learned, he will be in charge, so that, we know. But so far, I talked to some of them, and McGrath actually today, about the Democracy Shield, and I don't see yet a vision. But it's actually quite easy. First, we need to protect the Digital Services Act from Elon Musk, because... And I think this needs to be said, because a lot of people heard it from Elon Musk on Twitter or X, that it's about censorship. No, it's about opening up the algorithms. It's about giving more information to the citizens about how they are being influenced by their algorithmic bubble. And second thing, what we need to do is really to target the financial flows. Who has business out of this information? Is paid by Russian oligarchs or what? We need to see these flows. And again, it's just transparency, no censorship.
But you're concerned because you're saying that you don't think we have a vision here in the EU on how to deal with that. That's a problem.
I do think that there is a vision, and there is a notion now that this is actually really dangerous and it is destabilizing. What I think is also the core of this is that every single politician has to take on the responsibility to talk about this, to engage in this area, and also, of course, to opponents, to challenge them. And to say, if you are standing, it happens even here in the parliament, people standing in the parliament and saying nonsense. And we have to attack that, also if we see it in real life.
And political correctness has, quite frankly, gone out the window, hasn't it? But just also, we saw reports of interference in the Moldovan elections recently, claiming that F-16s would be landing in the country, and reports of EU sex education. Now, we do have as well this Stratcom, this task force in the European Union, right? But it's very under-resourced, Riho.
Yes, but the problem there is also that the politicians themselves use the same platforms for their benefit, and they're not ready to fight with something which brings them the votes and which brings them to the European Parliament.
So it's a tricky situation, because you said politicians need to solve the problem, but if they're engaging in the problem, we really have an issue here.
But I still believe that people in average are not stupid, and they can really differentiate what is wrong and what is right, and let us believe in that and try to do our acts. The problem with the EU is we are doing lots of different acts, but we really do not have a long-term strategy. And here I agree with you. We don't have a strategy on how we will, European Union will survive the 21st century.
So we don't have a vision, we don't have a strategy. This is very gloomy. And you mentioned, Steen, earlier, opponents. And on that note, this week, we did see MEPs hold a debate about Alexei Navalny, That's the Russian opposition leader who died in an Arctic prison last year while carrying out a 19-year prison sentence on charges that are widely seen as politically motivated. Has anything changed since his death, Steen?
Yes, a lot have changed, but I also think that, you know, this is also has to be an eye-opener, and it also has to be one of the subjects, and it was today, where we actually showcase, you know, do we agree on this? Do we see that this was, you know, something that happened by the hand of the system in Russia, or do we not agree on that? And that was also today a debate, of course. And there are parties, people here in the parliament who go to the chair and they stand up and they say, you know, this was not something that was done by the Russian system or by Putin. It was just, you know, a coincidence, an accident. And that is where, and I do think we have a strategy here in Europe to fight this, but it all demands that we do stand up and speak up and fight for the values that we have. That's our only defense.
Well,
Of course, Navalny was not the only one who died. I mean, in Russia is the joke, the Christmas calendar by Putin is you open the window and you fall out of it. I mean, there's so many people who are losing their lives. Navalny is just one example. Okay, we try to use it, but the autocracy and the terror in Russia is to that extent the same as it was 100, 200 and 300 years ago. So their narrative of the statehood has not changed. And therefore, he understands only power. There is no way that he is playing ice hockey and we try to do figure skating around him.
Exactly.
That is not the way doing it.
And that's kind of what Navalny's wife said, Yulia Navalnya, when she was here last year. She said, stop being boring when it comes to dealing with Putin. Marketa, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great bridge to what I wanted to say, because I sort of wanted to disagree that our values and everything is all we've got, because that's super weak. We exactly, as my colleague said, we need power, because as Karl Popper already said, with the paradox of tolerating the intolerant, you know, we will lose our democracies. You ask what happened in those past 2 years. Well, the fascism is on the rise. If anybody ever wondered, well, how was it in the 30s? In Germany. Well, now we are living through it, and we cannot just claim, oh, we are Democrats, we should let everybody speak 5 minutes Jews, 5 minutes Hitler. That's where it led, you know, astray and wrong. So we need to fight for our values.
But please don't get me wrong. That's my point. We have values, we have strong values together in the European Union.
But we don't have vision how to protect them.
But we need to fight for them, and that goes from defense to when we are in the parliament, when we are in the plenary, to stand up and fight for what we think is right.
I think I know what to do. We have to listen to the people and address the problems the people have. If we don't, then all the lefts and the rights will take it over from us.
Definitely.
I think people would really appreciate that if politicians would listen to them very carefully. But we also want to check in with some Russian journalists who are living now in the European Union in exile since that full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we had the opportunity to speak to Peter Koslov while he was briefly in town.
Media cannot actually get funding from Russia. They cannot have sponsors or advertisers from Russia. That was Russian government move to cut independent media from funding. Many journalists who were forced to leave Russia after the beginning of full-scale invasion are subject to pressure, even though they're being outside the country. So they are being actually jailed in absentia, and they're being labeled as foreign agents and so-called undesirable organization, which actually aim to prevent journalists to do their job properly.
Peter Koslov there describing the plight of Russian journalists who don't perhaps agree with the politics of President Putin. Has the Parliament been able to do anything to support these exiled journalists, Marketa?
Not enough, but it's also a complex situation of those journalists typically not knowing a lot of context. You know, I have just been yesterday or 2 days ago on an event where an exiled Russian journalist explained to us the perks of being exiled and everything he has to go through. And we asked him, how can we help you? And he said, please contact, network. I have nothing. He doesn't know anyone, because they are, of course, also being sidelined in Russia when they when they were still able to be
and
do
trying
their
to
job in
rebuild their
Russia.
lives and their careers and their bank accounts.
Yeah.
Quite
Yeah,
frankly, I mean,
exactly.
you know, it's not easy being a journalist.
So just included them. Yeah.
And sometimes it is so annoying when media here in Europe talk about the elections in Russia. I mean, that's not elections.
Or the
It's a
president of
theatre.
Russia, he could be
It's
Genghis
just
Khan
one
or
big
something.
theatre. If you don't have free media, if you don't have people that would disagree and where you exactly can respect your citizens so that it's their choice, you cannot call that elections.
And I was looking at the Reporters Without Borders index, and Russia has dropped down to 164th on that list. Obviously, the situation going from bad to worse, Riho.
Well, Russia has, well, I don't remember times where Russia had a free journalism. Perhaps a short moment in mid-90s there was one confusion, but it was very quickly solved by Putin as he arrived in power. There is no free journalism as such. No. The free internet gave a certain possibility to people to inform themselves about the real life, but that has been now controlled completely by Putin's system. So don't believe in that. But I have lived in the Soviet Union, and every evening my father took out the radio and listened to the Radio Free Europe or Voice of America, which President Trump wants to close now. But that was the kind of a fresh air coming, and there were the journalists who have been expelled from Estonia, and then they broadcasted back to real life. Okay. So this is the way.
This is the way. On that point, Rio, we can close this conversation. Stay with us, though, here on Euronews, because after the break, we'll be breaking down the massive AI summit that took place in Paris this week. Welcome back to Brussels, My Love, our weekly politics show, with me, Maeve McMahon, coming to you this weekend from Strasbourg. And as usual, we're taking a glance back at the news of the week, and one we wanted to break down takes us to Paris, where global leaders met with tech giants to write the future roadmap for artificial intelligence. The global gathering was hosted by the French President, Emmanuel Macron, with the help of India's Narendra Modi. And its timing coincides with China's release of DeepSeek. That's the AI app that hopes to wipe ChatGPT off the market. So, Marketa, was the summit a hit? I guess not really, because nobody signed the final document.
Yeah, I am quite disappointed. However, of course, for France, maybe it was a hit because President Macron promised that there will be huge investments into AI. Also now, everybody talks about Mistral AI, which is like the first European champion among the generative models. Yeah. So I think it's going in an interesting direction. But of course, Europe is underinvested in this regard.
Well, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was there talking about Invest AI, pledging 200 billion euros for AI. Where will this money come from, Steen?
2 billion.
Well, there is only one source, and that is all of us. So that is the honest answer. But we have no choice. I mean, if we really want to make sure that we can compete against both China and the US and you know, maintain our position in the world, we need AI to be heavily invested in. And of course, we also need AI to make sure that the way that we govern, that the way that we rule everything, it is such a powerful tool, and there is no other way that we just deep dive into it. What could be said positively is, even though we're a bit late, sometimes it's good in tech to be a bit late because you don't need to have all the sort of illnesses from the beginning.
The teething problem.
So,
well, we do have our AI Act, of course, which regulators here are very proud of. But we did see the US Vice President J.D. Vance warning against, quote, excessive AI regulation. We could see potential transatlantic fights here. Yeah,
well, I was part of the last parliament. I was part of the AIDA, which was Artificial Intelligence, the Digital Age discussion. And the discussion led by Germans was only about how to regulate something they don't understand.
Mm-hmm. Do you understand it?
I have the feeling that we can lose again like we did in the early 90s. What was the Queen Elizabeth Award for Technical Innovation in the year 1991? Do you know?
No.
That was the little widget, you should know, in the Kinescan to make foam. And what came second? That was the internet. because we were not able to recognize the importance of the internet, and this battle we lost completely. We lost about these tablets and phones. Now we have the possibility perhaps to do something. But in the year 2027, the computing capabilities, capacity will increase the ChatGPT by 100 times. We don't imagine what it causes to our labor market, because it takes away jobs.
And Marketa, you said that obviously for Emmanuel Macron this was a success because he promised to prioritise this area, and he obviously was all over the news this week and telling the press as well, we have to be in the race, we want to be part of it, we want to innovate, otherwise we will become dependent on others. And he said France will step up with 109 billion euros. Do you think that France can become a tech leader, Marketa?
Well, I do hope so, because we definitely do need some tech leaders. However, I still think this is not enough. I have personally read the book AI Race between US and China like 6 years ago from Kai Fu Lee. And Europe was barely mentioned. So we are already way back. But I sort of agree with my colleague here in terms of what DeepSeek showed us, you know, in being open source for a fraction of the money of OpenAI, because they came later and they could learn from them. So let's also copy and modify our own models, and let's jump on the bandwagon. It did not depart yet, so we still have a chance.
And as you said, it's okay to be a little bit late to avoid the teething problems. But where do you find the balance there between making sure we protect ourselves and, of course, human rights, and but also making money and making sure that all our brilliant people don't just head off to America?
I think there's a lot of things that can be done, and I do think that the framework that should be in place and is in place, but it could never be, you know, it's not a stale thing, it has to be further developed, has to be protection of our citizens. Having said that, that should not hinder good business. That should not hinder young people who are innovative, who have full of ideas to make real good solutions. On the contrary, that should be something we could market also for the US and also for other places.
And we saw this week a lot of NGOs worried that tech companies just want us to rip up all our regulation. I want to bring in one more view from AI expert in Brussels, Andrea Renda, who's been working on these regulations for a couple of years. Let's just take a listen to him.
Well, there is a lot of doom and gloom at the moment as to whether Europe can compete with the US and China. The situation is changing quickly. We actually have good things in Europe that we can rely on. For example, Europe trains more leading AI scientists than the US every year, according to our data. But then many of them end up in the US working. So we need to build a more attractive career for these people, and also a situation and an environment in which they can start their new ventures and obtain funding for their ideas. But then you also see that in China, some of the leading generative AI systems could be replicated with a fraction of the cost. So Europe has the possibility to bet on open source AI, and we do have a world-class open source community in Europe that can really make Europe competitive going forward.
So pretty positive there, Andrea Renda from CEPS. So we should see this as a growth opportunity and not just as a threat, Rio.
Absolutely, and I think we have an example where people talk about Estonia as a very advanced in the computing. Why we are there? Because our president started the Tiger Jump, so-called, brought the computers to every school in mid-90s, early 90s. And then the generation grew up. So we need to start AI education from the first grade, and we should do it in all schools. We need teachers, of course, that takes time, but we need the education that the people who have to deal with the AI know what they're dealing about. Today they don't. We don't.
Final comment, Stine, with yourself?
No, I just want to say also, when we talk about this regulation, and I do think it's good with solid regulation protecting citizens, but what makes young people jump to the US is also access to capital. This is not only for this industry, but for many industries. So we have to make sure that our young people with good ideas have easy access to capital, venture capital from the starting point and then growing.
And there's a lot of talk, of course, in Brussels about the Capital Markets Union, a topic we will come on to another day. But for now, we can close this conversation. Thank you so much to our MEP guests for being with us. And thank you so much for watching. Take care and see you very soon on Euronews. Welcome Welcome back to Brussels, My Love, your News' weekly political chat show. I'm Maeve McMahon, and along with some MEPs, we're just taking a look back at the topics under discussion here in Strasbourg. And as well as lengthy talks about AI, MEPs also discussed China's dominance in the trade of textiles. A number of outlets from Shein to Temu to L'Express have been booming over the past few years, grabbing consumers' attention on social media to lure them to buy them. But often items are fake, unsustainable, full of dangerous chemicals, or quite frankly bad for our health. Now, the Commission has launched an investigation into these Chinese online stores and is considering measures to combat unfair competition. So we're trying to see here, will the EU manage, Stine, to rein them in?
I do think so, and I think that the latest initiatives are also very well taken. And I do think it is a very wrong perception to say that it's something that we can all deal with. People should just think more about what they're buying and so on and so forth, because we should be able to trust, as when we enter a shop, when we go on the internet, we should be in a safe environment. And that means that we also demand from the platforms selling into Europe that they play by our rules.
They need to play by the rules. Marketa, your take on that?
I think you said at one point bad for our health and for environment, but also bad for our markets. Because if they don't follow EU regulations and all the other companies, including the European ones, are following EU regulations, then of course they are also losing revenue and we are losing competitiveness. Yeah. And I think there are some studies that we are losing up to €5 billion in revenues because they don't oblige and they don't pay taxes. So this is just a level playing field.
Because these online shops, Riho, they've been accused of creating, quote, garbage routes across the planet with fatal consequences for the environment. All these cheap textiles as well that we're building up around us, textiles that we don't need.
As a conservative, I would say educate your children and make them to understand that this rubbish is not worth it. Buy a good suit and wear it as long as you can, then it will not cause damage to your environment.
How do you tell a young teenager?
Sorry, I am too old-fashioned on that. But I have never bought a single item from the Chinese internet shop, and I will not do it. And the education is again a solution here. Of course, the second thing is we should finish the tax exemptions for the lower price.
But as a good conservative and also somebody who looks after businesses, I guess, you must admit it is completely unfair competition, as our colleagues said. And we have to make sure that we don't suddenly have, small towns without any shops, because everybody, without knowing it, and without realizing it, are just sitting there.
But the free market decides if the goods are good quality or bad quality. I'm not supporting Chinese. I would close the borders with China and don't buy from there anything at all.
No, because
quite honestly.
This point you make about the rural shops, I mean, this is huge in all across the continent in rural Europe. And it's fascinating if you look at the statistics when it comes to fast fashion. According to the European Environmental Bureau, to make a single cotton T-shirt, you need 2,700 litres of fresh water. Production is responsible for 20% of global water pollution, and only 1% of used clothes are recycled into new clothes. That's also a problem, Marketa.
Yes, absolutely. The environmental impact of fast fashion, as we now call it, is huge. We can also see on TikTok and other platforms that it's just about trends. They are trying to sell as much goods, as much T-shirts in 1 second as possible. So there are these hauls, and everything. They are even flying in China influencers so that they promote this fast fashion. So I agree to some extent it's about education of people. But of course, it's also about the same rules applying to everyone.
And we should do the same as Trump does. Tax it.
We are taxing it, they are not paying it.
Well, let's bring in the view from Else Brugman. This is a topic that she deals with every day in her organisation, Euro Consumers. Take a listen.
One thing we absolutely need to have a proper look at is the amount of chemicals in our clothing. There's just too much of them, too many of them. And of course, we have now a look at e-commerce and fashion coming in from shops from, linked to China. Unfortunately, there's no guarantee when we buy clothing in a European web shop that in the end, it doesn't come from China. We need to upgrade our European standards on chemicals in clothing. This has been blocked for years at European level, so there's just too much greenwashing right now and too little information on how sustainable a product really is.
So that's a summary there from Els Brugman. She's also very concerned about greenwashing. That's a topic that comes up a lot as well, Steen.
Yeah, and we should be concerned about it. And that is why some of the rules, now even we are trying to simplify and getting some of the rules out of the way, but many of the rules are also there to protect us as consumers, because in this very complicated world, we need somebody to protect us against dangerous chemicals, greenwashing, people who are saying that they're doing things in the right way and they're actually not, because we need to be able to have the right choice as consumers and to be correctly educated, as you say, fair enough. We need people to help us in that way.
And do we need to change our mindset as well about how we consume?
I think that we said the word education a lot. I think that it's important to realize why a lot of people buy from Temu or Shein. It's not just because they want the newest trend, it's because it is cheaper and they are in tough social situation, and you will not persuade them to buy a t-shirt for 50 euro if they do not have the 50 euro. So of course it's also about some social fairness and social awareness overall. But overall I think that supporting domestic production definitely helps. And also I want to mention the due diligence legislation, because we mentioned environment, but what about also the forced labor, the fact that a lot of it comes from Uyghur concentration camps and child labor. And I think that this way, you know, such as H&M, Decathlon, which now had a huge case of actually using Uyghur concentration camps labor, that we need to address it through that.
And if consumers knew all that information, they probably would think twice perhaps when they buy a product like that online.
Yes, but the European companies have caused that problem. They have decided to move all their production to China because it was cheaper, because they could have a cheap labor, and now it pays back. So we need to deal with China not only on the fashion and clothing. No. It's, the same thing happens in the industry, in the machinery, in all ways. So we need to protect ourselves, but still the market should decide, and I feel that...
And as consumers, we could be more responsible as well when it comes to disposing of our textiles, because a lot of things are ending up in the normal garbage, which is also causing a major problem. Well, on that point, we can bring this conversation to an end. Thank you so much to Markéta Gregorova. Thank you to Riho Teras, and thank you also to Steen Boss. It was lovely to have you with us. Thank you as well for joining us here on Brussels, My Love, Strasbourg edition. Do reach out to our email address. It's brusselsmylove@euronews.com. We love getting your thoughts and your feedback. But for now, thank you so much again for watching. Take care and see you very soon.